You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority. But the state is still formidable. Or is it? You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society. Let's dive headfirst into The White Pill Box with your host, Mark Maresca.
Greetings all. Thank you so much for joining today. Today I'm excited to welcome as my guest on The White Pill Box, Adam Haman. Adam, welcome to The White Pill Box.
Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, Mark.
Same here. Folks, Adam is a professional gambler and an amateur philosopher, economist, historian, evolutionary psychologist, and a critic of epistemic boondoggles. We're going to talk about that. He writes and podcasts about human nature and the institutions and norms that best suit that nature, allowing us to thrive and flourish in peace and prosperity. I will link to his work in the show notes, but follow him at hamannature.substack.com and on youtube.com at hamannature. He lives in Las Vegas, Nevada. And Adam is also active in the Libertarian Party, but that's mostly for laughs. And incidentally, that last part, folks, that wasn't me. That was Adam who wrote that, although I agree with him on that point. So let's get going, Adam. Well, why is it just for laughs with the Libertarian Party?
Well, first of all, I wrote most of that bio as a joke just to see if you'd read it, and thank you. You did. I've been a libertarian since 1990, probably, but never interested in the slightest in the Libertarian Party for various reasons. I would wish it well. I view it mostly as a vehicle for communication, try and move the Overton window rather than have more functional on the ground usefulness. But I joined it in 2019 because, I guess it was late 2019. I just thought the messaging had become very, very bad. It was no longer moving the Overton window in the right direction, so I joined a group of people trying to take it over and make it more in the image of Ron Paul for the minarchist types and Murray Rothbard for the anarcho-capitalist types, rather than this weird, uneducated, left-wing oriented pablum. It just wasn't doing its job in my view. It was interested in identitarianism and freeing people from bigotry, irrational or whatnot, and oppression from the state. And I'm fine with all that, but it just completely ignored what free markets are all about, the economic side, and it just wasn't very interested in promoting the full libertarian message. It had become too thick, if you're used to the thick versus thin framing of libertarian political philosophy.
Interesting. Then in that regard, how do you see its path since then? Because I know the original idea, like you say, Mises Caucus was really to bring it back down to principle, and it seemed to be doing that for a while. Do you see it as having slipped?
I'm still on board for the message, and I'm still active in the state party here in Nevada. I've become disenfranchised with the constant, bitter, juvenile squabbling between caucus factionalism. Maybe we wouldn't have had that if we'd had a more complete takeover, but we didn't. And then the organization did what most organizations do. They sort of metastasize, and leadership either diffuses or gets worse. It became a little cultish, in my view. Some of the best people in it just got kicked out because they weren't slavishly devoted to whatever a particular leader insisted be the course of action. So I'm still involved. I think their mission is still just as good as it always was. I just don't think it's very effective. If you ask me what the Libertarian Party is for, I still think it's true that on a nationwide, maybe even international scale, it's communication. Get your best communicator out there, and if they give you any kind of a spotlight at all, preach the libertarian message. Try to convert more people into the belief that government is force and force is evil, and voluntary interactions are always better. And then bullet point, underscore, explain, knock away objections, educate people. And then if it has a purpose on the local level, you can do a lot of good with small races. Get into your city council, become sheriff if if we really start being effective. Think how good having a good sheriff was during COVID. Mm-hmm. And most of the oppression here, it was things the governor said and things he allowed local Like our city councilors were just tyrannical. Get on your school board if you're not. I mean, get your kids out of school, but if you can't for some reason, get on the school board. So it's useful there. And I still think if the Libertarians can make up the difference in the vote count between the winner and the loser, we should be able to use that lever to influence the kinds of people that end up making it through the primary, because that system's corrupt. And being able to thwart a very bad, like how great would it be to thwart Lindsey Graham's $20 million election campaign with a $100 filing fee, just because there's enough voters who are willing to make that 3 or 4% difference so that he loses. And, if you're giving me Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, I don't care if it's AOC or Nancy Pelosi that wins. I just don't care. I'm not interested in right-wing versions of statism. Let the Democrats destroy it, because you're going to destroy it too. I'm not on board.
Yeah. There was a little bit of that on the run-up to Trump, where a lot of the libertarians seem to be interpreting a lot of what he said as libertarian, and maybe, I guess you could have a little bit, but I think that was a little bit of wishful thinking, and then they come out of it clearly disappointed, but I wonder if a lot of that is them disappointing themselves.
Well, I think viewing him as libertarian is clearly a mistake. What I think people were reflexively attracted to is whatever evils were going on in his head. He clearly wasn't of the regime. The deep state hated him more than they would ever hate anybody else, just because he wasn't part of them. And so since you see that all the elements of the regime are trying to destroy him, then, if you're antithetical to the regime and the deep state, well, then you think maybe he's your champion. But of course he isn't your champion. He's a crony himself. He's never read a book. He said a few reflexively knee-jerk anti-war things during both campaigns, and that's great. But, obviously he didn't really mean it, or not enough to do what it took to disentangle us from the wars in Eastern Europe and the Middle East.
1990, you said, so that's 35 years. That's a nice, solid length of time. Can you give us just a brief kind of backstory, how it is you came to become what you are?
Yeah, I don't know how brief it is, but you'll cut me off when it gets boring.
Okay.
As a kid, I didn't think about politics. I guess my parents weren't political. I would have thought I was a Democrat, probably, because TV and movies said those are the good guys. It's the evil, crooked businessman that's the right-winger. But I also read a lot of science fiction, and lots of those books have libertarian themes in there that probably struck a chord. But in my freshman year of college, it suddenly occurred to me that, it seems like the government, since it has all this power and resources, should use those to help the little guy and not the big guy. But then it occurred to me that it doesn't have any power and resources. It steals everything it has. And that can't be right. I mean, you can't commit an incredible crime right off the bat and then pretend to do good, with the proceeds. That's not a thing. So I thought I was a Republican for a few months and listened to people like Rush Limbaugh. Very quickly, I'm like, well, this ain't me either. So somebody put Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead in my hands, and I devoured that and thought, now we're onto something. And then I read Atlas Shrugged, and I knew I was a libertarian. And then I read everything she ever wrote and the people in the objectivist camp that came after her. And I probably thought I was a minarchist for quite a long time until I stumbled upon Ron Paul again in the late 90s, the Mises Institute. So I started delving into Austrian economics with Mises and Rothbard and Hoppe. And real quickly, I was an anarcho-capitalist. The last big shift in my linchpin was when Stefan Kinsella convinced me that intellectual property itself was a fraud. That was probably the last thing to fall, and so that was kind of my journey.
Wow, nice. That's a lot of parallels with my own. And I was going to specifically ask you, was there any particular points that you changed your mind on not along the way, but since then? And sure enough, it's even
several.
For me, it was
yeah.
Intellectual property, that was a big one, though. That was a big one. I had to overcome that one. But boy, you read Kinsella, and it's like, there's no argument here. This is it.
Kinsella's a slam dunk intellectually, but then you might think, okay, this is the right thing to do, but maybe I'm dooming our society to live in a less technical, innovative world than we could have had. But then you read the companion piece Against Intellectual Monopoly, I think it's called, by Boldern and Levine. And they just historically dismantle that argument. We have had tons of innovation before patents or in areas where patents and copyright just don't exist. And it's just a bald-faced assertion that you can't have innovation without patents. It's not empirical. It's just a claim.
Yeah. My favorite comeback is this. In a system of intellectual property like we have, and you're an innovator of any kind, or an artist, whatever it is, what is the toolbox that you have available to you? You have what you are licensed to, permissibly licensed to use, and public domain. That's it. That's your set of tools. What's your toolbox like in a free society? Literally every idea man has ever come up with. That sounds like a bigger toolbox to me. So just on the face of that, it does seem like we would probably still have innovation.
Yeah, my gut feeling is that we'd live in a Jetsons world if we didn't have intellectual property, just because of the retardation of innovation that comes from these thickets of patents and fears of litigation. Because people just, once you've got the license to steal, but you turn into a crony, not an entrepreneur. And on the artistic side, I do not think that our best music gets created by people who are just in it for the money. I think people are creative, and so they will create. And how best to monetize that? We learned since Napster that it doesn't have to be selling the digital copy, because, anyone can steal that. We know that. But artists still make tons of money because fans want to see them live and in person, and you can sell not just the music, but all the trinkets that you get in a big box set, live Zoom calls with the people who give you. There's all sorts of ways to monetize people who love what you do. It does not have to be, the way we thought of it in the 60s or 70s or whatever. Man is creative.
Like I can tell when he's on the point about the fact that the suppression of innovation kills people. Literally kills people. That's him at his best, and I think this ought to be one of the most persuasive arguments. I want to shift gears and talk about you as a pro gambler.
All right.
I listened to the Bob Murphy and John Pollock interview you just did, and up to that point, Adam, I thought that Bob Murphy was better than me at every single thing in the entire known universe, but I learned that I have something on him. My level of ignorance of gambling is much greater than his. So could you distinguish a professional gambler from a not so professional gambler? Are you licensed by the state, for example? Kidding.
That's actually a joke I told my prospective mother-in-law when I first met her. To answer your question, the word means nothing. You don't belong to a guild or anything. You file with your taxes differently as a professional than a non. But other than that, it doesn't mean anything. And in fact, I never did file professionally because I wasn't that big time. The guy we interviewed, John Pollock, he puts me to shame with his love of success. I just played a little poker compared to the guy that's moving in those circles. The joke I told my mother-in-law, I was propping at Hollywood Park in California, where you're getting paid by the casino to help start poker games and save poker games that look like they're close to busting up for lack of people. And I was describing the situation and the tax situation, and she was like, well, if you're a gambler, don't you have to register with the government? And I was appalled. She is her mother grew up in Eastern Europe. These are Jewish people, New York, Manhattan Jews. And so I looked at her and I said, register with the government? Yeah, well, like the Jews, you mean? Point being, why in the world would we think that people need to register with the government for anything as a reflexive take?
Right.
But no, it just means that for the most of my life, I supported myself playing poker. That's all it means.
So you'll get some probably naive questions here or newbie type questions. My impression is that you're playing against others in order to, win. Is it all about the tells and the psychological, the sort of just reading people, or is there more to that? Is the conversation part of it, or strategically and so on?
Great question. your bread and butter, the nuts and bolts of winning money, is just your tighter hand selection and your more strategical approach to the game. It's the way you play the hands. And then on top of that, if you're good at reading people, you can increase your win rate by, 10 to 30% just by being really good at that. But the way you make money is just by playing better, checking and betting and folding and raising than your opponents do. And you mentioned conversation. The game used to be more social. At its best, it's a social game. And not only is it more fun to play, but it's more profitable when people are just, treating it like a pastime. This is something we're doing for fun, You can take it seriously without being a guy hiding behind your sunglasses in your hoodie with your headphones on and just, being an antisocial jerk. The best games are where people are having the most fun.
But are there the types who try to use conversation, say, to distract you, things like that?
There are many people who will say that, and I can point to specific examples where people did that, but mostly I think it's a rationalization. They have neurotic or anxious reasons for speaking, and then they'll try and justify their behavior after the fact to say that it was more tactical. It's like when you see famous poker players blow up at a guy for making a bad call and, sucking out on him with the worst hand. And then they'll say things like, well, yeah, it looks bad, but what I'm trying to do is people respond poorly to negative emotions, so I'm going to put him off his game and he's going to play bad. No, you're just a jerk, man. You're rationalizing after the fact that this is a tactical move. You can't control yourself. And I think it's the same way with chatty players. I think they're just chatty. And they hope it has a tactical benefit, but I don't think that's why most of them do it.
Wow, that's awesome. And you've been doing this forever?
I don't really do it anymore. COVID kind of broke me for one reason or another. They shut down the casinos in Vegas. I've got a video, the wife and I in the car driving down the strip, and it looks like an apocalypse movie. Some of the big, huge casinos have signs saying, get better. We'll see you. We'll see you when we come back. I literally saw a tumbleweed roll in front of the car as we drove down the Las Vegas Strip of all things. And so I got just really annoyed by that. I was annoyed that most of the people I played with every day just went along with it, if not actively encouraged what the government was doing. When they finally reopened the card rooms, not only were there mask mandates and various iterations or various levels of vaccine mandates, but they literally, you picture a poker table, they literally made plexiglass enclosures, partial enclosures with walls, 2 or 3 feet tall, with a little slit in the bottom for you to push your cards and chips through as you're wearing your mask. They wanted you to play poker like some kind of an animal in a menagerie. And I was just so offended by that. Yeah. And by the fact that the people I played with and liked and respected were like, yeah, we need more of this. And I wish people weren't so inconsiderate. And the government's really cracked down on those people. And I don't know, some switch got flipped in my head, and I just don't want to play with these guys anymore. So I don't know. I'm writing at my Substack, and I'm podcasting, and we'll see if that turns into anything. And if not, I'll have to go back to the tables. But I don't know. I'm annoyed. I'm not over it. They really damaged a lot of innocent people in this country, and I am still holding a grudge.
Yeah. Your recent Substack article touched on that.
Right,
that resonated with me too. We can't forget that. That was a true global human offense.
Yeah.
And I can only hope that the statistics, the actual, data as it comes out over the next half decade, kind of supports it. It already is to a great extent, but you got to look. I hope that puts the lie to what they did. We were in Vegas too, just at that time. And boy, as an anarchist, to walk across and see the Statue of Liberty, the replica over there, masked, they actually, I don't know if you remember, they had a mask on the Statue of Liberty.
I didn't catch that. No, I didn't see that. That's horrific.
That's
not funny. That's not solidarity. That's criminal. Literally masking liberty.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah. As an anarchist and seeing that, imagine that's like, no. So, yeah, I don't blame you.
I hope we eventually get some closure. But the trouble with the social sciences is, like if you were referring to the damage done, to our kids, to our businesses, to life expectancy, what were the long-term effects of this weird vaccine thing that was rushed into everybody's veins. The trouble with analyzing that sort of stuff is you can't disentangle all the various possible cause and effect parameters, which leaves plenty of room for bad actors or ideologues to just make the case that, we should have done more. I mean, you've seen it with the Keynesian economists or the monetarists or modern monetary theory lunatics. Right. They can make all kinds of claims and point to the data the same way we do and just say, hey, we have no counterfactual. Who's to say that my claim isn't correct and yours is right? And we have that same problem with analyzing the medical, the economic, the educational effects of what they did to us, which means, oddly enough, the anecdote tends to be more powerful. Because at least people can resonate with that. Oh, this person, this family, this business got destroyed. This person has these horrible effects. And maybe we can move the needle with that. I don't know.
Yeah. And then for me also, that's why sticking to principle and always coming back to libertarian anarchist principles helps, at least to the extent we could say, these MMTers, they don't have the right to even speak on this because what they want to happen can only happen with a gun. Boom.
Right.
Whatever happened with COVID only happened because of a gun. I mean, I realize it's not a slam dunk for a lot of people, but it is that principle that is actually true. And, falling back on that doesn't hurt.
I think you're exactly right, Mark. And I really, really wish we could inception into the public consciousness the idea that you can't create virtue in a society with an evil mechanism. And the ring of power is evil. Tolkien tried to teach us, and we all sort of like these movies and cheer it on, but we just don't get it. We get our hands on the ring of power, or even close to it, and we think, well, no, all we need is the right person in charge to use this horrible weapon, and I won't be corrupted by it. And yeah, you will. Forcing your vision of society on other people against their will is criminal.
Yeah, I agree. And I like how you tend to always pull it back to that, or maybe not always, but you commonly do that. You did that in your recent, what you call it, debate with Hornberger and Murphy regarding the borders.
I mean, it was a discussion. I don't think it was much of a debate. I just wanted real-time response, at least, to some of the points we were making, because it seemed like we were just talking past each other when it was just podcast response. And so I thought it was effective in that way. We at least got our audience to see him sort of answer or not answer what we were saying, and he made his case clear. I just think he happens to be wrong. First, he's wrong, I think, to cling to minarchism. I think that's an unstable, incoherent system with evil baked inside of it, because the state doesn't have a right to tax you or order you around, force you to use its security service system and its legal system if you do not want to. And he clings to that, and it comes with a ton of baggage that, as anarcho-capitalists, we're not encumbered with that. I don't know what society is going to look like, but if you at least reject force and rely on private property and voluntary transactions, at least whatever way society unfolds in that way, it'll be honest, and it won't be delivered upon high by the point of a gun. I think that's one of the critical evils of humanity. We literally think we can force other people to act right, and it won't cause problems.
The one thing in that interview that I think I expected going in, given the three powerhouses there, was a clear introduction of the concept of property in libertarian theory perspective as sort of a touchstone of how to kind of work through the discussion. Property got touched on, but only to the extent that it almost seemed like it was stipulated that government property is legitimate, and since it's legitimate in the context of the world we live in, now let's debate the points. Did I miss something? Was like, should property be introduced in a libertarian sense when we're having debates like that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to try and give my bungled version of the answer I think Stephan Kinsella would give, which is that the state shouldn't exist, and it does not properly own anything. And Jacob was trying to make the distinction, that the federal government doesn't own X, Y, and Z. That's really the state or a county or a municipality or something. And I think that's irrelevant. We are living in a situation where de facto they exert control over everything. that they want to. And that is what ownership means. I mean, maybe they don't have the right to exclude, but they have the power to. So they're acting as the owner, whether we like it or not. And I always think having a firm foundation on property rights is critical. Like we reference the non-aggression principle, but that's not a primary principle. It's a sort of a shorthand. But what it refers to is what property rights are. That is how we determine what aggression is by whose property is being aggressed by who. If you don't have a firm idea of what property rights are, you can't answer these questions when they become difficult. So in terms of the immigration thing, I mean, yeah, I could have argued that the government shouldn't own this, but since I'm talking to a minarchist, I didn't see the point. I was just trying to say it doesn't matter what they say or what the law says. They have the guns and the tanks. They do own it in principle. And so since that's the case, should we have an opinion about how it's used? We can't abolish it. Do the citizens who are taxed for these things have any say about who is allowed into these public spaces? Or do we as libertarians just have to shrug? And I say no. I think it's part and parcel of why minarchism is incoherent, because you can't just rely on private property, right? Since we don't have private property, you're necessarily going to end up with a tragedy of the commons situation. And I love Jacob. I mean, he's been a hero of mine for years. I would like, since we're entering into a populist, nationalist reaction to the left-wing insanity we've been dealing with for several years or several decades, depending on your perspective, since we're getting that, I wanted Jacob to tell right-wing populists that you don't want to be xenophobic. But he was making just this stronger case that, no, we just need to be open borders, period. And that just can't be right. You're inviting your own destruction if it doesn't matter. Again, he rejected the hypothetical, but if 8 million people come and invade your local or Central Park, and you can't have any recourse in this minarchist statist system just because, in principle, we favor more open borders than less. No, I say no. I also say it's a push for anarchism, because there's no argument with private property. The owner determines who can come and go. And I'd like to live in a system that's very open. That's the kind of society I'm going to associate with. I think businesses will find it quite profitable to have a very lenient, I will allow anybody in unless they're a problem system. But you have to have that, or else, if you are a problem, I can exclude you. And I'm not a criminal, or I'm not an unlibertarian for exercising that right. And I just think Jacob is wrong about that.
All these types of discussions do get messy, all because you're necessarily saying, well, all right, we're going to argue statism on statism's terms right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard my analogy of the sand in the engine, but the metaphor is there's a world. It. Oh, you've heard it?
Yeah. I think you said it in part 23 of your 23-part series.
Yeah. For the listeners, the sand in the engine metaphor is simple. It's we postulate a world where, for whatever reason, every engine that rolls off the assembly line or is repaired must have sand in the engine. Forget why, it just is that way. It's never questioned, just like in this world. Government is never questioned. And all of eternity is spent determining the best way to make sand in the engine to work, to make engines work. Right. And you cannot say, like we pie-in-the-sky libertarians would say, you shouldn't have government. In that world, you can't say, well, stop putting sand in the engine. Nope, not allowed. Because after all, we do have to live in the real world. We can't live in no sand in our minds. And so that's a little bit like the world we live in here. Where we're
that assertion just stands in for an argument. But no argument has been made. You just asserted that. Right. You haven't made an appeal to human nature. You haven't made an empirical appeal. You just said it. What are you, crazy? You can't have a world engines without sand in it.
No,
I think we can.
Right? But it does also sadden me that a lot of conversation in our space is really kind of that conventional discussions. I mean, the border discussions are interesting. They exercise our brain. But in a sense, we are trying to figure out how to make sand in the engine work by making borders work in a statist context. Again, I'm not trying to diminish the conversations, but we are forced into that awkward position in a sense. What do you think?
I think you're right. And as much as you and I like books and super intellectual, nerdy podcasts, I don't think that's what moves the window. It was a book that that shifted my perspective, a work of fiction. I think it's culture that really changes people's minds. And so I think we need to just hope that creative people, like many, many decades of science fiction authors have done, sow the seeds of distrust in political authority into compelling works of fiction, and that moves the needle. I usually use the analogy of gay rights in this country. I don't really think it was white papers that did it. It was TV shows. It was Will and Grace. It was people seeing in fiction that they liked, just regular old people that happen to like having sex with the same sex, and they're not, there's no horns coming out of their heads. I think it's narrative. We think in narratives. We have a narrative structure in our brain. It's not a logical one. It's a narrative one. We evolved that way, and it is works of fiction and art that move us. We firm up the logical foundations for the things we think through logic and through white papers. Austrian economics, the tenets of anarcho-capitalism, the fundamental principles of libertarian legal theory. That's what we use our logic for, but that's not what gets us there. It's a compelling narrative that pulls at some of our values, that support things that we think are good and virtuous and true. So that's what we need. We need less of what you and I are doing right now, Mark, and more songs and Netflix series.
Yeah, I've said that the scholarly work, to me, is essential for the coming free societies. As they emerge and establish themselves, their lawyers and their economists and their entrepreneurs are going to need frameworks. It'd be nice not to have to reinvent that wheel, and they can read Rothbard and they can read Kinsella and so on and say, oh, look at this, somebody's actually written about this stuff. I could kickstart my...
It'll also help that if you look around, we do have thousands of years of common law. And it's broken and messed up because legislation interferes. But the principles of wise people using cultural norms and private property ethics to decide tricky cases, that's really, really useful. If we'd never created legislatures, that's what we'd be using exclusively now, and it'd be a more healthy... It would probably be an anarchist system.
Mm-hmm. It came close. Yeah.
How are you going to stick state power in there as an appendage to a private property system? It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's really not natural, and that's what I consider one of the weaknesses of statism is it's simply not natural. It doesn't comport with what most people do and behave in their private lives. Most people, as far as I know, they don't rob, steal. It's not that they're born with the non-aggression principle in their head. Grandma taught them that.
One of the ways I try to spark this intuition is to remind people that we are still a very, very young species. And it just takes us a while to figure things out. I mean, we thought that the divine right of kings was the height of social understanding, for a long time. It took us forever to figure out that it wasn't right for one person to own another person. Like, people thought slavery was as essential as the sand in the engines that you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. And of course, from the perspective of people millennia ago, slavery was a big improvement over what came before that, which was simply slaughtering everybody that you had any kind of a problem with or a battle with. But we figured out that was wrong. We abandoned monarchies in favor of a democratic republic, and in many ways that was better. But it's ridiculous to think this is the end of our growth in terms of political theory. I think that if we don't nuke each other all to death, in hundreds of years or thousands of years, if humanity is to continue, it will be under anarcho-capitalism because that's what's natural. That's what is correct for our nature. And exactly what it looks like as far as social norms, who knows? I do think there are some that are more correct for our species than others, but whatever evolves from interactions between free people in free association with free contracts, that's what's supposed to happen. As long as you're not introducing force into that equation, I think we do the random walk towards what's proper for our nature. And anarcho-capitalism, I believe that's the North Star, politically. Libertarian, that's another mistake libertarians make. They think that's the end-all, be-all of philosophy. Like it's supposed to tell you how to live your life, how to raise your kids, how to love your wife, what to do for a living. No, man, it's this very narrow sliver of philosophy. Go read the Stoics. Go read a bunch more to try and figure out how to be a good person or or a good family member. Libertarianism, if all you think is just don't hurt anybody, if that's like the beginning and end of your understanding of how to be, you're literally retarded. Your growth is stunted and retarded. That's not correct. The non-aggression principle is a limiting factor, not a guideline to morality.
Right. But it is the starting point, and it's a good starting point. And when we observe virtually every person that we've ever known and know now, they live their private life that way. They're not knocking each other over the head.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Yeah. I don't know that the species would have survived without, or if it had been any different. But what I like is that thread that you kind of hinted at, that historical thread, from monarchy to, slavery, all those. And it is interesting that one of the common aspects of that is the undoing of a bad idea. It's not like they had some scientific reason that slavery was a good thing, and then that got improved over, with a better scientific idea. No, it was really the disentangling of a myth or a bad idea. And that's essentially clearing of a fog.
Yeah, we have to keep relearning. Like, it's a quick shortcut that I can just pick up a club and knock you over the head and in the short term rearrange the world to suit me. But we have to keep relearning the meta-narrative that using force like that doesn't scale. It's against our nature. It retards innovation and growth and peace and prosperity. It raises our time preference, meaning we literally can't look towards the future and build towards the future thinking like that.
Right.
But there's something about the way we evolved that makes it our quickest thing we rush to. I could just fix this if I put enough grit into it, big enough gun. When we've evolved properly, that won't be a thing we just reflexively think. Which is another thing I like that you say, or at least you allude to. People just reflexively look at some social problem in the world or economic problem and think, there ought to be a law. And using government to solve these things is almost always wrong. No, there shouldn't be a law, unless what we're talking about is literally the use of force of one person on another person. Okay, that's a proper area for the law to combat. But that's not how people use that phrase, is it?
Mm-hmm. No. They use it the way they were trained to use it. It's that's the propaganda and indoctrination. There ought to be a law. That's just a jumble of words when you really, really try to press someone on it. In fact, when you do that, what happens is you don't get cohesive arguments or rational thinking. You get discomfort. You get psychological dissonance because there's a part of them that, like I said, that grandma and mom and dad taught us, don't hit others and take their stuff. That's in them culturally, and it's applicable in their actual life. And yet you say, well, wait a minute, government ought not to initiate force. And boom, there's that dissonance. Two halves of the same self are sort of in conflict now, a false and a true self. And that's the discomfort. That's why we have such a hard time persuading them. It's because the battle is happening in their head. And in a sense, we can't, in my opinion, psychologically, we can't just fix that. They have to fix it. They have to work it out. And that's for us, our aha moments, whenever that happened to be in our own world. Do you actually remember anything close to an aha type moment where you realized, hey, the state does violate consent? That's bad. Any moment like that?
Well, yeah, there was that one I alluded to when I realized the government doesn't have resources. It does not first steal.
Right.
And then when applying that to like all the horrible regulatory state, it was reading Atlas Shrugged. All those narratives just made me realize just how crooked and evil, and obviously crooked and evil, the whole situation was. In fact, I was so stupid and naive. I'm looking around and I see this enormous government structure, and this is 1990 or 1991 or something, so it's gotten that much more metastasized since then. But I read Atlas Shrugged and I go, oh, great. This woman explained things so well, we don't have to live this way. We just need to get enough people reading this book, and then we can reform the system and it'll be fine. And then I go to the front of the book and read the copyright. It's 1957. And I was sad. I was like, oh. And then I read that it's like the second most influential book, next to the Bible.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, they have read it and they don't care. Or there's some impediment to fixing the system. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't take all of her ideas or her axioms to their logical extent, which is why she was a minarchist herself. She was embracing a little of the incoherence there too. But boy, I was depressed when I when I found the moral case for freedom expressed so powerfully and clearly. And I know a lot of people have read it, and it gets dismissed as juvenile. Yeah, but that's not the way the real world works. Oh, and back to what you were saying before, people understand that they shouldn't steal from people that are on their level, and they shouldn't hurt them. But they change their mind immediately when they think of the government. And I think it's because, again, we're a very juvenile species, and we still think of ourselves as little 4- and 5-year-olds. And there must be a mommy or a daddy who can initiate force because they know better.
Right.
And I think we're going to grow our way out of that as we mature, I hope. Because if we don't lose that reflexive mindset, we stay squabbling children forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we are growing out of it. And I think part of that is just the good fortune of technology and the internet.
Yes.
Having decentralized the propaganda. That, if you really think about it, at least to the extent I have, it does seem like the state utterly and completely relies on the propaganda. It's not just like one tool that they could use if they have to. No, I realize they have the guns, but guns are a last resort, man. Last resort. You do not want to be pulling out your last resort because it's the last tool in the toolbox, and it's the most obvious admission that you're not in the right. So no, they need that propaganda desperately. And at least in my lifetime, these last even 5-10 years has really, really been in a positive direction. I'm extremely hopeful in that regard. I mean, clearly since 1990, you see that change.
Yeah. The internet, for all of our clumsy use of it, clumsy and destructive, has been an incredible boon. As our people like to say, regarding the gatekeepers of information, the people who run propaganda, the gates are still up, but the fences are down. Nobody cares, what the New York Times says anymore. And I think Murray Rothbard used to say that, every libertarian in the country you could fit in his living room, in the 70s or whatever. And that sure isn't the case now. Even as a percentage of population, we have grown a whole lot. And you have, with the internet, people having conversations with one another that just would never have happened before. And I think that's all tremendously to the good. People are getting interested in deep conversations again. And just the fact that so many different people are talking to one another. Ideas are being proliferated, such that I do think it's going to impact the culture. So as pissed off and annoyed as I am, I do feel more white-pilled than anything else, despite the fact that, we're still losing. The state is still gargantuan. COVID woke up a whole bunch of people that were never going to listen to the things we had to say because they still trusted the government. I think 5 years ago even, people would laugh at you when you referenced the deep state. There's no such thing. Well, they don't think that anymore on either side of the aisle. And I think that's wonderful. When parents saw how the teachers were treating their kids over those Zoom calls, it red-pilled a whole bunch of people. Mm-hmm. The way, right-wingers reflexive here, like, you got to trust the police, you got to trust the district attorney, because that's, what do you want? You want civilization or you want barbarism? And then they saw the way the DA and the cops treated Kyle Rittenhouse during that thing in I forget the name of the town, but you saw cops and police, or cops and district attorneys just lying their butts off in the service of pure evil. And that woke up. How beautiful was it to see right-wingers wake up to their reflexive trust in the FBI and the CIA might not be well placed. That's a real good thing. Mm-hmm. We do have to worry about where populism like this can lead, because it can get ugly and nationalist. The left-wing version is storming the Bastille. And I don't know what the right-wing version of it is, but it's ugly. We don't want that either. But at least the unshakable faith in the state is breaking down. And we just need to guard against the different left and right-wing sides just thinking, well, yeah, but it's not a structural problem. We just need the right people in charge. Mm-hmm. I think we've made a lot of inroads in that wisdom, but we're not there yet. So we'll see, right?
Yeah. I think, oddly enough, and ironically, I think the Trump experience added to that dynamic, and not because he did it on purpose. He's just a bumbling idiot. But by giving people the impression he was a true outsider representing the outsiders, and he's going to nail the deep state, and he's going to arrest Fauci and this and that and all this stuff. He got people hopeful in a way that was way beyond what they otherwise would have, because he's just this unique personality, one that probably only comes around once every 50 or 100 years. And by him disappointing enough people, I hope, can't know until we see it, but I think it's going to really sour people a little bit more on politics in general, because this was their shot.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm guilty of falling into short-term thinking too. So like when Doge failed to change almost anything structurally, I got sad and disappointed. And when Trump revealed that he was going to defend all of the evil in the deep state that was being, whatever would have been revealed if the terabytes of video information that Epstein clearly had gathered throughout his evil machinations of Trump he ran on unearthing and uncovering and exposing all of that, and instead he covered it up. And I think it's better for libertarians and anarchists that that's what's happened, because we don't want to think that this system is just going to work just fine if we get the right guys in charge.
Right.
I mean, we elected who MAGA thought was the right guys, and we cheered at some of these political appointments. I cheered. I'd much rather see Tulsi as the head of the DNI than anybody else I've ever seen. And, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a little bit too much of a statist, a lot too much of a statist. But I like that he was going to try and uncover the corruption between the government regulatory apparatuses and big corporations that use that tool to poison us and enrich themselves at the same time. So I was in favor of all these things. And it's sort of revealing that it didn't work. It didn't even come close to working, really. The closest we're going to get is him threatening to use the power of the state to go against Obama and Clapper and Brennan and whoever. And oh, by the way, nothing's going to come of that.
Right.
It's just a distraction because his base is still upset about the Epstein cover-up, as they should be. The what they told you about the nature of the government you live under in fifth grade civics was a lie. It's not even close to that. It's closer to a blackmailocracy than anything else. The will of the people is, who cares? Who cares about that people?
Yeah. I mean, all that it's a joke. It was just part of all the propaganda that they tried to, instill on us. But what's cool, especially in your case, 1990, I go back to the 70s myself, and you get to have this long-term perspective where you really can contrast how it was then and how it is now. And so, yes, as bad as things are, you can always find the bad. In contrast, it's looking pretty good, and I think we are on the right trajectory. Again, I agree with you. I call it a race. Government can always destroy us with another, a biological catastrophe, a nuclear. Assuming that doesn't happen, I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I think so too. It's another common trope among our type. Short-term pessimism, long-term optimism, that sort of thing. But I think this political philosophy is the right one. We just have to free ourselves. Lots of societies have been enslaved before, and thank goodness one of the other aspects of our nature that is on our side is we do yearn to be free. Even though we've had over 100 years of all our kids almost being propagandized in these government schools, and even though the government infiltrated the quote free press a long time ago, such that they operate as literal mouthpieces for either the left or the right-wing versions of these regimes. Despite all that, people just instinctively value truth and freedom, and that's powerful. That's bottom-up, evolutionary-style power that can build a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean, you see it in fiction. You look at Braveheart, Star Wars. We're always rooting for the rebels, and in a way, you can look at that and say, well, wait a minute now, that's almost contradictory. Like, you guys are, living under the boot of the biggest empire in history, the United States of America, and yet you cheer the rebels. What is that? Well, that's that cognitive dissonance. But to me, there's a white pill in that, and that is your loyalty to a regime is reduced to, one, namely the one you happen to live under right this second. You don't even have loyalty to the Woodrow Wilson regime or the Abraham Lincoln regime or the Canadian regime today. Every single government on earth you consider an illegitimate government over you personally, except one out of 200. I like those odds.
Yeah, I do too. I'm sure you've familiar with Michael Huemer, the philosopher
Yes.
out of Boulder, Colorado.
Yes.
Love his book, The Problem with Political Authority.
Yes.
And everybody should read that. Not joking. But one of the things I love so much is that it is a very, very powerful philosophical argument. And what is the lever he pulls over and over again from different angles? It's intuition. It's your sense that this power is illegitimate. You know it. In every other circumstance, you know it. And what changes fundamentally that gives this alien-like entity the power to wield force legitimately doesn't exist. When you look at it, it evaporates. And I like that he uses intuition rather than, I don't know, formal logic or something awful like that, because that's not the way we think. We think in intuitive, perceptory structures that are motivated by narrative. That's how we think. Every story in that book is some sort of a little mini narrative designed to prompt your intuition and make you recognize the truth. No, the state doesn't have any legitimate power. That was just spoon-fed into you when you were a little kid. It's not your fault, but it's time to throw that up and grow up.
Right. Yeah. Huemer's on my list of. He's agreed to let me interview him, and I am going to focus actually on the psychological aspects of that very book of his, because he's one of the few who's done that. He's kind of explored it from that psychological angle. That and Larken Rose's Most Dangerous Superstition is another good one that kind of attacks the psychology of it. And as you probably know just from listening to my stuff, to me that's key, because I think it's the key to the way out. And so I'm very interested in what Huemer has to say about that, because obviously there's a powerhouse brain right there. But yeah, I love his thread of intuition. It's always there, and it makes so much sense. I love listening to him. Yeah, he's one of my favorites for sure. You were talking about fiction. Have you seen The Jones Plantation, the movie that Larken Rose put together? There's a good example, I think, of what you were touching on, just sort of a publicly consumable way of communicating these thoughts. Evidently, you have seen it.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous. I mean, there's a spectrum between just a story and like John Galt's speech, in Atlas Shrugged, between preachiness and, like a good narrative. And I'm not going to suggest that The Jones Plantation hits the balance like perfectly. First of all, it's subjective, but it's pretty good. As soon as you see what they're doing there, he's channeling Robert Nozick, really. Like what is the nature of being a slave? At what point along the line of political authority is this? Are you a free person with a government atop you, or now you're just a slave? It's largely arbitrary, and the devices that they use in that movie are perfect.
Yeah, he did a good job. He really did. And then I think the producer recently came out with another. It's a mockumentary called Barnum World.
P.T. Barnum?
The title is taken from that, Barnum World. And it's essentially the expressions that are used by politicians, the catchphrases that they really don't say anything, but they get in your head and they make you follow in lockstep. Part of that propaganda. It was a good sort of expose, let's say, a comical take on it. I'll link to that too. I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Those little catchphrases, those little memes, they're so powerful. And we used to have a healthier set, right? Back when people would reflexively say it's a free country, where now instead they say there ought to be a law.
Yeah.
And, we used to have this culture that was just more rugged. I don't even know if individualistic is correct, but just more aimed up rather than focusing on identity and, oppression. And don't focus on the past, focus on the future, and just more self-reliance, more faith in your own rights rather than looking for somebody who maybe you can extract something from. And, those hope and change, gross. So let's make America great again, really, because it doesn't mean anything,
No,
it's just
right.
these little,
Yeah, a lot of our camp were sorely disappointed during the COVID experience, because they looked at people and they said, "Wow, you rolled over for this. How could you do that?" Including, by the way, a lot of the libertarians rolled over.
I know.
And there's no doubt that was disappointing. For me, the first disappointment was 9/11, because I also saw there a lot of libertarians tuck tail and run. But I guess I try to take a a view of those kind of things as that means that my perspective on this was wrong. It's not that they were wrong. Well, all right, they were probably wrong to roll over like that. But I didn't expect it, which means it was me not understanding just how thoroughly they were indoctrinated or how thoroughly they could be scared by a perceived contagion. That makes me at least look at them in a different perspective.
You have to, I do believe libertarian political philosophy is correct, based on our nature correct. But to fully understand that, you got to read some books and think about it. But fear and tribalism, those aren't in our big cerebral cortexes. Those are buried deep in our brain, and we get there real fast. And so when you're afraid, you might turn off everything else about your brain and only focus on contagion bad, shut door, wear a mask, get away, other person, vector of disease. And the same thing with tribalism. When you see the World Trade Centers get knocked down like that, and maybe you don't know much about the evils of our evil foreign policy for the last several decades. You just think, those dirty bastards, how dare they? And so you rally around the flag, and I get it. The best of us didn't do that, but I totally get it. It's not an error on their part to react perfectly naturally. You just have to think your way out of that. You have to reactivate your cerebral cortex and not just reflexively turn the entire Middle East into a sheet of glass, as many people said, on September 12th. So I get it. You go back and look at who was writing correctly on September 12th, and it's all the best people.
Harry Brown.
Yep, Harry Brown. He's the one I think of first.
But we're also fortunate that when COVID did happen, it happened in the context of the internet and the decentralized dynamic that's been happening. I think of something like COVID happening back 2001 when 9/11 happened. It would have lasted, I think, many years, but it had to fizzle within a year or two because the truth was coming out, even to the extent it did, even then, and the state just couldn't keep that up. I believe firmly that if they were able to, they would have kept those draconian measures in place. And yet, if you remember, you don't remember how it ended. It just stopped. It fizzled.
People just eventually said, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah. And
I also think that, think back to the propaganda of World War II and World War I.
Yes.
They can propagandize us into not starting a revolution when they send money to Ukraine and to Israel. But since they don't control the mouthpieces of propaganda like they did in World War I don't think they could conscript people today. People know enough to they wouldn't just go along with it. They wouldn't fall for, you're right, we do have to send boys from Kansas over to Europe to save the world from the Huns. That just wouldn't fly these days. And that's good. There's lots of white pills if you just look for them.
Yep, I agree. And we're up on the hour, and I like ending on white pills. So was there any other topics or things you want to plug before we wrap up?
No more topics. This was great. It was good to finally meet you and talk to you. If people like to hear more of my voice, visit my YouTube channel. It's Haman Nature, Haman, and use quotes, or you'll get a Michael Jackson video. And I like that song, but it's not me. And I write also at my Substack, hamannature.substack.com. 5 days a week, I put out an interesting, I think, article or a link to a podcast episode that I did, and that's my stuff.
Hear, hear. I encourage everyone to check out Adam's stuff. I love in particular that he's very eclectic. It's not the same old boring stuff every single day on the same topic. He likes different topics, and if you like variety, you're going to get it with his stuff. So I think with that, we'll wrap up today. Thank you very much, Adam, for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark. My pleasure.
And again, folks, be sure to check out his content in the show notes. Thank you all for joining. Take care, and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.